Hi, everyone. Welcome to our next session, Systems of Change, Black Innovations in Today's America. Again, my name is Naja Yasmin Daniels, she, her, Aya, and I am the community manager with the Inclusive Capital Collective. Today, during this session, we're going to be discussing our first Black paper and what that means for the Inclusive Capital Collective and how we have gotten here. I'm going to go and start by asking our wonderful authors to start by introducing themselves, and then we'll go into our first opening question. So Avery, if you would kick us off, that would be wonderful. Welcome, everyone.
Sorry, I was muted. Sorry about that. Hey, everyone, can you all hear me clearly?
Yep.
Okay, awesome. So thank you for having me. It's a pleasure to be here today. My name is Avery D. Evron. I use he, him pronouns. I'm the head of community product and operations at the Guild. We're based in Atlanta, or the greater Atlanta area in Georgia. And my personal motto is from Lauryn Hill, is how you gonna win if you ain't right within? And so I try to take that with me in my work, in my practice, and in my personal life. So it's kind of the undercurrent of how I approach, what we do. So thank you for having me, and I'm excited for this discussion today.
Thank you, Avery, and we'll popcorn to Anthony.
Hey, everybody. Thanks, Naja. My name is Anthony Jewett. I'm a senior advisor here at Southwest Florida Impact Partners. We're a community intermediary focused on the vibrant six-county region that is Southwest Florida. I use he, him pronouns as well. And my personal motto is the African concept of Ubuntu, that I am because we are.
Thank you, Anthony. And I'm going to pass it to Kevin.
Hello, my name is Kevin Williams. I'm the CEO of Black Squirrel, and we're based right here in Philadelphia. And we had the great pleasure of working with all of these great people and being able to contribute to the Black paper by having one of the case studies that were used in terms of using our project, our Philly Rise project, as a case study in terms of how we see the different partners working together. And it was a really good experience for us to go through. And we can talk some more about that as we go through the session. But thank you very much.
Thank you, Kevin. And Lanier?
Great. I'm Lanier Richardson, he, him, and I'm the CEO of Chicago Trend. I also lead the Center for Urban Entrepreneurship and Economic Development at Rutgers Business School. Also very proud to have participated in the Black paper and to be affiliated with this group of innovators, capital innovators, and look forward to our session today.
Thank you, Lanier. So we're going to start off with an opening question. And that question is, what is the Black Paper series and what made us decide to tackle this subject first? So I'm going to provide a little framework and then ask that my wonderful Black Paper authors step in as they feel called to. So the first of a series of Black papers, not white papers, the Building Community Wealth, Shifting Power and Capital in Real Estate Finance, contextualizes the current and historic challenges and innovations of BIPOC brilliance, rooted in holistic, community center, and legacy change. Our Black papers are a series of briefings written by and for practitioners, as you see here today. They illuminate the systemic barriers in financial markets, focusing on specific areas and segments that are ripe and in innovations that are rooted and focused on social justice changes. Each Black paper spotlights scalable solutions that are developed by our own Inclusive Capital Collective members, and we invite you to learn more about our Black paper today. So the innovative structures and models that we talk about today are not new because of what's happening in pandemic days, but again, have been worked on by our members and their entities for time and are really doing impactful and important work in today's age. And I'm going to invite that my Black paper authors speak about their experience and why they wanted to write about this Black paper first.
So I'll jump in. I'm Lanier. It was interesting. Last year, pandemic, protest, political pandemonium, right? That's how I sum it up. And we came together, even in advance of the craziness of last year, because we believed there was power in collective voice, that we all were approaching accessing capital and community development in our own strategies and that we would benefit by working it collectively. One day in one of our sessions, someone said, we need to write something and we need to write a white paper. And I know it was a member of Kevin's team, Kevin and Tom, that said, forget a white paper, we should call it a Black paper, right? But really the goal, and I think we all immediately, thought that's a hook right there, as the young kids would say, right? And so the opportunity is crystal clear. Wealth is created by owning assets that generate revenue and assets that hopefully appreciate over time. And so all of these discussions related to racial wealth gap closing and generational wealth transfers and inclusive economic growth, buzzwords of the day, can only be empowered if we help more people of color access capital to own assets, businesses, and real estate. And so everybody who's worked on the paper, who has been a part of our little subgroup in the Inclusive Capital Collective, from Philadelphia to Portland to Chicago and every place in between, all are focused on accessing capital, deploying capital in an intentionally inclusive way to close the racial wealth gap. And that's, to me, that's what gives me energy as it relates to our work around the Black people.
Yeah, and I can follow up you, Lanier, on that. And I definitely agree with all of those points. I guess I'll add, from my perspective, it was really important for me that, because there's a lot of noise around, real estate, commercial real estate, the wealth gap, why things are the way they are. And so for me, I thought it was important to provide some succinct but poignant, like, historical context around commercial real estate in Black communities, BIPOC communities over time, but also connect that with what's happening or what has happened today in a way that's accessible for a lot of different folks, not just folks deep into the real estate or financial industry, but other folks who are interested, but there's a lot of noise and a lack of, a clear-cut understanding. And so I think that was one of the key things that drew me to it as well. And then secondly, just to unapologetically advocate and demand and bring light to, Lanier, what you're alluding to is a lot of the work that's been done for years of folks in community with solutions, with strength, with ability, and just completely under-resourced. And so really connecting the dots in an accessible, clear way for folks across the spectrum, from what the problems are and the challenges are and the history and the context, and what's being done and who's not being resourced, and what you can do to move the needle and to actually mobilize these resources, not just because you think you might want to do it, but because you clearly understand where your place is in it and how you want to mobilize. So those were two of the key reasons that I was really interested in this paper, especially being able to do it with, great company. So that's my piece for it, and I'll pass it off.
So I guess I'll jump in here. Let me just say, and once again, I'm going to add to what you gentlemen have already said, but I think it's very important to point out that you know, especially from Black Squirrel's perspective, and the challenges that we're talking about, there's a lot of moving pieces. And it's not always easy for people to understand how those different pieces interact. And at the end of the day, we all understand that when you have the municipality or the city government, you have corporate America and the real estate development corporations that are already built and have been growing in leaps and bounds across the country. And they've been kind of squeezing out the little guys. And in a city like Philadelphia, like Baltimore, like Atlanta, when these opportunities are squeezed out, we need somebody to be able to kind of stop that process, and we need to actually reverse it. And so when we talk about this Black paper, it's not just talking about putting the spotlight on what the problem is, but what we've also done is we've created solution models that others can follow. So you'll look at, if anybody that's seen the paper, it's very well laid out. And when you look at the case studies that go along, there's different models that are being put forth to tell you how these solutions are going to be able to impact society. And I think it's important also to note, anybody that lives in Philadelphia, I'll tell you, we've had some great discussions. And I have to say, to emphasize what Avery said, the chemistry and the camaraderie that we have in this organization to actually create solutions and to work towards those solutions is very powerful and uplifting. And I think it's going to be a great thing to see exactly how far we move the needle, because I don't think it's going to be acceptable for any of us in this room to say, you know what, we moved it 1 degree. I'd like to see this thing move all the way down the field, because there's a lot of gap that we need to make up. And when we talk about the first Black paper, it's the first time that we're highlighting a serious problem in terms of generational wealth. And we're also providing 3 solution models for people to look at to see how they fit into their particular situation. And I would be more than happy to say, anybody that would like to hear more about what we're doing here in Philadelphia and the Black Squirrel and the other organizations we're bringing to bear, such as Laura at ULI, Angel at the Land Bank, and others. It's because we need that whole team and that collaboration to make this work.
Follow up, fellow panelists and Kevin there. I think we're grateful on the part of Southwest Florida Impact Partners to have been a part of the first Black paper from the ICC. We are certainly in pretty incredible company, and are glad to have had our work here in our city highlighted. I think our hope in participating was 2 or 3 part. You know, one, we want to make sure that the second cities, as we call them, the 700 cities of, less than 1 million people or so, or 1 million people or so in this country, that are not major metropolitan areas, like the city of Fort Myers, where we focus our work, also have a roadmap for how we can attack the history of inequity in the capital markets, and specifically in the ownership of property in our communities. And so it was really an honor for us to be able to be profiled alongside folks in big cities like the Guild in the Atlanta area, and our colleagues from Black Squirrel in Philadelphia for that reason. The reality is, we like to think that so many Americans, live their lives in communities just like ours. And the solutions that we're trying to enact here in partnership with our government will give us some insights that we can lend that may work in those communities as well. And I think probably the second piece of why it has been so important for us to participate and to have been profiled in this knowledge building is that the ICC itself is such a valuable, has been such a valuable community of committed peers that we otherwise would have not been able to know in the way that we do right now, who inform our work. And a Black Paper series, as the series has been described, it's not just about, it's certainly about sharing knowledge and providing a couple of case studies about what other folks are doing. But it's, in some ways, we hope an off-the-shelf how-to. When I'm at a starting point of trying to implement something that I don't know how to do. And I think some of the tremendous value from the real estate working paper is just that, is it can serve as an off-the-shelf how-to. And I and my colleagues are really excited about the subsequent elements of the Black Paper series that are going to provide that off-the-shelf how-to for other innovators across our country and communities just like ours who need guidance but don't know where to start.
Thank you, everyone. Greatly appreciate your insight. Going into our questions, what does the perception of risk in real estate strip away one's personal or communal autonomy? Why?
I can take a first stab. That's okay. And I have a feeling you all will dive more. So I have two things, and that's the emotional, sort of unspoken philosophical piece to this and how it removes autonomy. And then there's a practical, financial, economic one. And so I'm going to lean more into that first one because there's plenty of things to be said, I think, after I speak about the second one. And so with the perception of risk, like how it strips away personal and communal autonomy, I think the biggest thing in Black and Brown BIPOC communities, however you may want to name it, is that there's an essential unspoken no before you even get to ask for resources. And I think that's organizational, whether it would be small business or nonprofits. That's with families on various levels. And so you're expecting a no because you are inherently risky. And so you are not to dream or aspire. And I think just taking a step back, I think that's sort of kind of a key emotional effect of it that affects different folks in different capacities in our communities. And so I think that creates a trust gap as well. And so when folks are trying to come in and support your autonomy, because you know that there's this perceived risk and it's sort of been there for a long time, there's a difficulty even engaging because you know you're perceived as risky. And so those two things I think are things that are often at play in organizations trying to do work in communities. And I think lastly, what I'll say is that the results of being perceived risky, a lot, and this gets a bit of the practical because you don't have those resources you need, and sometimes that leads to, negative outcomes that sort of justify the perception of the risk in the first place. For example, if you're not to be given a loan and you go out and get a high interest loans or terrible financing, and that affects your ability to operate, and now you're defaulting, and now it's sort of a confirmation that you didn't deserve it in the first place, despite the fact that you just were not given the resource appropriately. And so I think essentially it creates a perception of, hey, look at these places, look at these organizations, look at these people. They are risky. Look at what we can see. And I think it is emotional in the minds of perhaps other communities, but it's not acknowledging how it got there. And it's because there's a perceived sense of risk in the first place, and resources and all of those things that you need were not available as a result. And so I think that's that I think that strips away autonomy because it sort of isolates folks. And sometimes I would say make it even more difficult for them to apply or seek resources, knowing that there's this perception of risk. So I'll lead with that side of it. I try to be a little bit nuanced with that one, and then I'll pass it on because I think there are plenty of practical things along with the factors of production, capital, real estate, all of that, and I'll pass it to the rest of the panel.
You know, I'm gonna jump in here real quick. Avery, I got to give you a lot of credit, bro. You're so eloquent in how you say it. You know, because I'm gonna focus on one of the things that you said. It's how did we get here? You know, there's perceived risk and then there's the real risk. The perceived risk is because we need to educate ourselves and each other on how to build that type of wealth, and how to use real estate as a vehicle to do so. Unfortunately, it's a real risk for us because we don't have the generational wealth in our back pocket to be able to take that risk without risking our pension or our retirement money or our home. And so when we sit down and we talk about how we get stripped emotionally, it's real. Because we know that if we're going into this with a risk of potentially losing everything.
You know, you got this kind of fluctuation.
Now go ahead and say what you were going to say, Ann, because those are the things that set the table for where we are. And I'm not saying that we need to be given favors, but I think we need to be absolutely given equal access. And of course, you know, we'll talk more about that during a session that I have later on. But to the point that the question that you're asking, Naja, we really need to, on the perceived risk side, we need to make sure we educate ourselves and each other in forums like this.
I think Anthony's off mute. Do you want to say anything, or I can jump in here as well?
Please go ahead and jump in.
So, you know, hopefully I want to set the table around the problem as 20% of the meeting, so the solutions are about 80%. But access to capital has been, you know, downright hostile to Black real estate developers and entrepreneurs, right? I was happy to get into the paper a concept of friendly capital. Right? For my 30 years in entrepreneurship and you know, almost all of that in real estate, I've often confronted hostile capital. It means I need 3 points up front to make an introduction. I need you know, a preferred return. I need a share of ownership. I need you to pay all my legal. I need you to and then ultimately a whole, you know, pay for all the appraisals. And I'm not going to guarantee you I close. So, you know, this thought of taking tough capital that, you know, because there's this perception of risk that's unrelated to the project, is somewhat related to the sponsor and to the neighborhood, is something that, you know, is a challenge. Secondly, you know, early stage capital is a political statement that says early money is like yeast, right? And, you know, getting early capital, pre-development funding, the first, you know, $50,000 or $100,000 into a project. As Kevin just alluded to, because of the history of systemic inequality, you know, I don't have friends that I could very easily go to and say, hey man, you know, invest with me the first $50,000 or $100,000. I had to have the deal fully baked, controlled, all the other financing lined up, the tenant in place, the construction contractor selected, a guaranteed maximum price. So there's no, again, there's no, it's tough to get friendly capital. I call it, the need right now is dequity. It can still have discipline of debt that says, you know, I understand the underwriting. I got to believe there's a pro forma that makes sense, but it needs some optimism, the optimism of equity, right? So that I see your pro forma. I believe in you as an entrepreneur. I understand you know how to navigate in these circles and in these communities. You have the relationships with anchor tenants and retailers, and you know how to make the case. If nobody's taking a view that says, I'm betting on this person and I believe in the future projection, all of that still feels oppressive, right? And I think that's what we're trying to overcome through well-structured deals, best educations, formally and informally, best schools, the boardroom, the back room, the alley, we know how to do deals. And now it's like, how do we get capital that will say, all right, I'm gonna take a risk on you. And I understand the nuances of the project and believe you can accomplish the objectives.
I mean, if I could, I'm going to piggyback on the optimism that you brought in your response just now. I think, I come from the world of youth development into community development. And so one of the things that bothered me deeply about my time in youth development was I learned, this was in the early 2000s and whatnot, so 2010, 2012, I learned that unfortunately, to get folks to invest in Black children, that I had to sell the poverty of Black children. Or at least that was very effective, and my distaste for that sort of drove me into this, into the world of philanthropy and then into community development, trying to figure out how to be on the other side of the resource equation. And I am hopeful that we will move, and I mean that for myself and my colleagues, in the way that we invite investors to place capital, with us for the initiatives and entrepreneurs that we play the role of first in capital for here. How do we move from selling Black poverty to Black possibility? Because I think that one of the ways principally that this concept of risk has robbed us of autonomy is that it has made those of us in leadership positions or in positions to intermediate often be in the business of selling Black poverty. And so I'm holding myself accountable and kind of calling others to the mat that we need to reclaim Black possibility and put that in the forefront and work with capital providers who want to be about that.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for that. And Anthony, great segue to our next question. How can the ecosystem shift from extractive capital stacks to equitable ones? And why does this matter? I also welcome you panelists to speak about other ways that folks can bring equity into this process. Lanier, you're muted.
Yep. So, there's a moment that, we're focused on intentionally creating inclusive ownership structures, right? So, I asked myself, what should we do differently and systemically to, create different outcomes in our community, to create wealth, to create more owners? Over the last 18 months, we bought 4 community shopping centers, community serving shopping centers. Not Best Buy and West Elm and, the Gap and Cheesecake Factory, but sort of local little centers where, you go to buy carry-out pizza or the Rite Aid drugstore or healthcare or nail salon, or business services. Right? And we could have done that in a traditional private equity model, right? We find we act as GP, we find a number of limited partners. We, put up anywhere from 5 to 10% of the committed capital. We do a project, we give our limited partners a preferred return, then there's a waterfall. But when I looked at that, there was nobody else but us and the limited partners who already had capital actually, benefiting from the investment. And so our focus became, well, let's find a way to find philanthropically motivated impact investors. And we say, look, we can get you back your capital. We can get you back a 5% return. That's what we wrote about in the Black paper. But what we like to have happen is on the same terms that we will invest, we want to give small, local, and Black residents and entrepreneurs an opportunity to co-invest on the same terms. And so that if we are right, that there really is annual NOI, and that there is ultimately an exit event and upside, that the community of people of color will benefit from that. And in the interim, we'll understand what it means to own, we'll experience the pride of ownership, we'll protect the commercial property in a different way, we'll patronize it in a different way. And so all of the other non-financial objectives, as well as seeing Black professionals work on the property as property managers and as leasing agents. We have to repair the roof. We hired a Black roofer, right? We're maniacal about clean and green, right? Protecting and respecting assets in our community in a different way. That's just not a cash cow to be extracted from, but community, show it some love, invest back in it, because we know we're going to be here long-term and benefit. That's the capital. That's the opportunity for impact investment, mission investment. All those, again, in some respects, they start to sound like buzzwords. But if somebody really thinks of themselves as an impact investor, as a mission investor, that can say, all right, give me my capital back, give me a return, 3, 4, 5%, but show me that there's 100 other small investors that will benefit. Show me that there'll be Black folks who will have the pride of ownership. Show me that there are Black professionals and contractors working on the property. And ideally, the dreamy stuff is 10 years from now, you'll look and you'll see crime in the neighborhood is decreased. Educational outcomes have increased. Poverty has decreased. Property values have increased, right? That's what we're trying, that's the opportunity for philanthropically motivated impact investors now.
Yeah, thanks, Lynette. That was wonderful context. And I think I'll sort of elaborate a little bit on the project that the Guild is doing in Atlanta too. And I guess to riff off what you're saying and not be repetitive, I think another important aspect to capital stacks being equitable is that different communities have highly contextual problems and situations. And so a one-size-fits-all approach is difficult to actually deploy in the communities that are marginalized and need it the most. And so I think there are some general things around, lower cost equity and friendly debt, Lynette, that you're mentioning. Definitely that help that. I think the other piece to it is time and repayment requirements, because if you're really working deeply with the community, for example, we have a property that we have and we're working with the community. We've gotten the property up front. They're gonna buy back ownership so that they have a reduced level of risk on the back end. And while we're going through that process, we're working closely with them around everything from pricing to what's in the property. So they really are taking on like a co-ownership hat. We also had to turn it into a mixed-use property. Our original thoughts was that maybe it might be commercial, because there's such a high level of displacement happening in that section of Atlanta. And so to not provide permanently affordable housing in our community, it's a community stewardship trust property, would be problematic. And so it's taken us a lot of iteration and time and work with community. And so the capital provider to us has been extremely patient, has worked with us. And had they not done that, this wouldn't be possible. And so I guess what I want to say is that there's a little bit of, when you're designing these capital stacks, the little nuances, you really need to listen closely to the folks who will be ultimately, it will be benefiting, and not just designing for them and expecting it to work out. So I think that's more complicated, but I definitely think that is a big factor too, of working closely in the design process to make sure you can actually deliver in a time frame that works for the community outcomes, community asset building, the community ownership, so that it's practical for the people in that community.
Thank you, Avery. Kevin, do you have something to add to this question before I go to the next one?
Absolutely. Let me just say, because first of all, Lanier, he pretty much covered everything in what he said. But I just want to harp on a couple of things, because you mentioned the ecosystem, and sometimes that word seems to be overused today. But I think it's important to think about what our ecosystem needs to look like from the standpoint of lawyers, the standpoint of architects, designers, educators, project managers, all of these people, when they are, at least either they came from some of these communities or they look like the people that are in that community, they're able to build that trust, because this is it's not something that happens overnight. And it is something that it's a long game here. You know, we're all invested in this. Yeah, we expect that we'll make some money, but we're really invested in this because we do want to see a change in the communities. We do want to see a reduction in crime. We do want to see an increase in education. And so when we make sure that we have committed partners in that ecosystem, they have to be invested in it long term as well. Unfortunately, from a political standpoint, you know, usually you're talking about people who need something today or tomorrow because they need a soundbite that's going to help them stay in office. And so it doesn't always work well in how, you know, we can collaborate with them unless the timing's right. But I think that what we're talking about in the big push here is how we keep building on the teams and the partners that we expect to be there when this is actually working.
Thank you, Kevin. So I'm going to move on to the next question and ask that our panelist and author, Anthony, kicks us off. So as we know, real estate is the largest source of asset-based wealth and opportunity in America for families, yet Black and Brown communities of color have systemically been marginalized from renting, owning, and financing real estate. So my question to the panelists, and starting with Anthony, how do we center racial equity in real estate? And what are the most crucial changes we must make to be effective?
I think this question could go a number of ways. I'll tell you about what I'm learning about centering racial equity in real estate, and hopefully that is valuable, and there's some expertise from the rest of our discussants who can add to that. I am learning about the importance of communal ownership. I work in the community, and I share this often because I think it's incredibly important to understanding my experience, and the thesis probably that undergirds why we're doing what we're doing through Southwest Florida Impact Partners. My family has been in this community for 5 generations. So the work is very deeply personal. And I see my nieces growing up in the same place where my great-grandparents got married and raised their families. And at the same time, our urgency around revitalization in the historic Dunbar community here in Fort Myers came from 40 years of just very clear disinvestment. Just clear disinvestment. And yet the opportunity that it is creating now that this region is attracting so many new residents from all around the country for displacement. And we are trying hard to figure out, hard in this middle place, how we combat the displacement that we've seen happening everywhere else before it takes place right here. No one wants that. And I mean, I think sort of roughly around our community, no one really wants that, but economic forces have a way of forcing that to happen, and we can see it on the horizon. And so collective ownership is the means by which we're fairly confident that we can continue to center equity and racial equity. We haven't figured out all the answers to that, but collective ownership is our starting point, I think.
I invite others to share their thoughts.
Well, yeah, I guess I would just piggyback off of that and say that collective ownership and collective governance, the ability to have a say at the table, not just at the end, and this goes back to the previous question, but when it's being designed, when it's, going through the different iterations of what it might ultimately end up being delivered as, and the management of an asset, there needs to be a window into ownership, I think, in all of those phases, ideally, because you won't, from the beginning, I think you'll start seeing more personal ownership by the community, even before some of the practical ownership takes place. And I think a lot of that is really a part of it too.
Thank you, Avery. And my last question for this session is, what are the opportunities that are available for both values-aligned investors and funders, but also individuals who may not be in that part of our ecosystem? As Kevin mentioned before, there's a variety of ways to get involved and to provide feedback. So share with us what's happening in your regions, how folks can get involved. Of course, with the Inclusive Capital Collective, we are a nationwide based cooperative. So we're happy to welcome and accept folks in all forms. So kicking it back off to my authors, what's going on in your area?
Kevin, you want to talk about Philadelphia? I want to make sure you get your opportunity, man, because I can go on.
You and I can both compete for time, but let me just to start this off. Let me say there's a whole collective of things that need to happen. And one of the things I haven't talked much about because it's not as cute and sexy is training and knowledge. One of the things that we lack in the community is understanding the value of a home. And when we come into communities, and we're talking about real estate development, a lot of times talking about ground up development, but even when we're talking about renovations, it's pretty much the same thing. You have a lot of people, especially in Philadelphia, who have aired property, but they don't understand what the property's value is. And sometimes they're selling that property well below what its value is because they think it's a quick way of them to make money. But they don't have any sense of how that money is going to be used to invest in something that's going to grow. So when we look at how you can build equity in a home, we need to explain to people what that means. And if we're talking about taking equity out of the house, what are you going to do with that money to help it continue to grow? And so these are the types of things that we need to have conversations with people right at the fore of what we're doing. And a lot of the things that we're talking about in our projects is going into the communities before we even start the development, to start that educational process, to find, as we said, there's something for everybody. It could be the person who is retired in that community, and you know what, they want to be able to find a way to invest some of their money. And it could be that helping them understand how to invest in their community and show them what that return looks like and explain what that risk looks like, and get them to start to see people that look like them that are making these types of moves. When you start giving those types of options to people, because when we're going into a lot of these communities, to Anthony's point, you know, we're selling poverty. You know, the people don't have a lot of hope in terms of how they see themselves being able to grow or to get educated. And so, you know, for a lot of people, you have to pay for this type of education. We need to offer it for free. We need to let them understand how it's going to build their community. We need to understand how they can play an active role in that community. We need to be able to bring in architects and engineers and builders that are going to be partners in that process.
Could you come? Never mind, I got it.
I can add just briefly. You know, I think there's a few stops along the spectrum, right? And until the Black paper, we focused on 2 of them, and I think there's a third stop that I would like us to focus on. So, you know, the one stop is grant capital. So grant capital that provides outreach and education and training, as Kevin is mentioning, and certainly needed. And there's, you know, an indirect return on investment that, you know, we can do the work around, which is impact, as we talked about, increasing home ownership rates, more rehab activity, lower crime, higher educational outputs, those type of things. The other end of the spectrum is traditional private equity, right? And there has been a lot of written about helping more Black fund managers and, you know, emerging managers get access to institutional capital, pension fund capital. And again, that can invest that capital and, you know, get a market return sufficient to allow, you know, the pension fund and other capital providers an opportunity. But what I'm hoping is that there's someone on this call or in this audience or connected to someone that really wants to be in the middle category that says, I have capital, it's $100,000, $1 million, or $10 million. And if you can show me how I get my capital back and get me a 5% return, I'm willing, and show me all the inclusive economic development objectives can be met, closing the racial wealth gap objectives can be met, I'm willing to invest, right? That's where I think there's opportunity. And that's where there's more investors needed now, and that's the case we're trying to make.
Thank you so much, Lanier, and my fellow panelists and Inclusive Capital Collective members. I'm going to ask that if folks have questions, please share them in the form that Angela's just shared in the chat. This evening, it is truly my honor and my pleasure to welcome lifelong Philadelphian Mayor James Kenney, the 99th mayor of Philadelphia. Since 2016, he has championed bold anti-poverty initiatives, including the expansion of free quality pre-K, the creation of community schools, and the historic investment of hundreds of millions of dollars in parks, recreational centers, playgrounds, and libraries, all because Philadelphia became the first major city in the United States to pass a tax on sugary drinks. Now in his second term, Mayor Kenney is focused on advancing racial justice and driving an equitable economy recovery from COVID-19 to ensure that Philadelphia is a city that works for all. Thank you so much, Mayor Kenney, for joining us today. And I'm going to pass the mic to you.
Thank you very much, Naja, and good afternoon, everyone. First, I'd like to recognize Venture Cafe, Black Squirrel, and Inclusive Capital Collectives for providing space for such important conversations here. It is great to be here with you all to discuss how we can all work together to create wealth for minority people through real estate, especially as we celebrate Minority Enterprise Development Week this week throughout the city. Real estate is a tool to establish wealth and create generational opportunities of financial stability. Our administration has worked with the city's nonprofit, PHDC, to create a new pilot program to help address the lack of diversity in the Philadelphia real estate development and construction industry. PHDC's Minority Developer Program, or MDP. Minority developers in Philadelphia have been underrepresented for far too long, and MDP is poised to help fill that gap. As we position Philadelphia to equitably recover from COVID-19 and its human and economic toll, the Minority Developer Program allows us to expand more opportunities to small developers and create jobs while supporting an inclusive construction workforce. Aside from MDP, the city is also supportive of the City Council's Neighborhood Preservation Initiative that will bring back our wildly popular Philly First Home program. This program has helped thousands of Philadelphians purchase their first home, which is the first part of wealth creation in America. Many of these first-time home buyers were people of color, and this funding will allow many more persons to realize the dream of home ownership for the first time. We're also happy to have a presidential administration that cares about our people and wants to work with cities. Homelessness and affordable housing are on the front lines of the struggle for racial equity. Too many people of color wind up being homeless, and that means they can't get an education, hold a job, or otherwise achieve their personal dreams. But as a city with many historic challenges, we have to work together to make progress. So before I hand it off, as I mentioned earlier this week, marks 37th annual Minority Enterprise Development Week. For nearly 4 decades now, MED Week, organized by the city's Department of Commerce and Office of Economic Opportunity, has highlighted minority-owned businesses and the resources that help them grow. I strongly encourage you all to participate in this week's events, where you can learn more about contracts and other resources that are available to you. More information can be found at phila.gov/MED-week. That's phila.gov/MED-week. So thank you again for inviting me, and hope this is a very productive event for everyone.
Thank you so much, Mayor Kenney, for taking the time to be with us today. And thank you, Naja, Avery, Anthony, Lanier, and Kevin for this amazing session. So we're going to take a few minutes to transition over to the next session. So stay tuned, and thanks everyone for joining us.